Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April 13th, 2020. Time for yet another show. Time for yet another week. And time to put yet another day of quarantine behind us. Ready to roll with another show today? It looks like you kind of have to be. There's no choice. Plenty to catch up on, of course, at the beginning of this week. Lots happening over the weekend, as usual. Greg Dworkin, ready to join us for a Monday appearance to try and help us catch up on things. Important happenings over the weekend, but of course we will focus on the petty and foolish, if at all possible. And believe me, there's plenty of it. Believe me, there's plenty of it to go around. Hey, what's occupying Twitter this morning? Rand Paul is out of the hospital. We were wondering last week what had happened with him, and I think probably before we got off the air on Friday, we actually knew what was going on. But then I guess we probably realized that we didn't care that much about Rand Paul, and maybe we didn't mention it. I don't know. But he's out of the hospital, and that's good news for his neighbor who might want to pummel him again. I really have no idea what he has in mind. But I see this morning Aaron Rupar circulating stills from his appearance on Fox News this morning, saying Rand Paul has emerged from his COVID quarantine and has a beard now, which is something that a lot of us are doing during our pandemic quarantine. However, well, for one thing, I will say this. It's probably not recommended, and I know everybody's doing it because they're quarantined and they're at home and they're not going out, and they think it's fun and interesting. And in addition to sitting around in sweatpants, you grow a beard, and that's kind of a fun thing to do. I've done it from time to time. I've certainly let days go during the quarantine and wondered about doing it again. But I remember now, as I see the still of Rand Paul there with the chyron from Fox News Live, Senator Paul volunteers at hospital after recovery. And I do recall reading that he said he was going to do that. I guess this means he doesn't think COVID-19 is a hoax anymore now that he's had it. So he's going to volunteer at a hospital, and he's grown himself a beard just in time, of course, to render any N95 masks he might get a hold of relatively ineffective. Certainly less than peak effectiveness, as I understand it, because you don't get quite the tight seal on the face that you're supposed to get for a mask like that when you have facial hair. That was something that we got warnings about early on, but I think we've forgotten. Also, just as a reminder to everyone, I don't think anybody has forgotten the wash your hands direction, and I hope nobody has actually forgotten, but we don't say as much, I notice. We don't remind people not to put their hands near their face, not to touch their face quite as often. It goes hand in hand, no pun intended, with the hand washing, of course. But, you know, as some of you may know, there's nothing quite like growing a brand new beard to keep your hands away from your face, especially if you're volunteering at a hospital. Well, okay. Good luck then to Senator Paul as he heads into his volunteer period and whatever. So that was of some interest to me in the morning. Anyway, as you may know, the show is live now. If you didn't know because you were listening to it, you'll know because Bill tweeted it all the way from Portland, Maine. Daily Co's Radio is live now. The question on everyone's mind this morning. Good. I need to find this out. Did America open back up in time for Easter and become great again the way President Trump promised it would? Kagro X, me, David Waldman, has the answer. The answer is no, but it'll cost you $50. I should have read that second sentence first. All right. Well, I saved you $50. Don't say I never gave you anything. And if you do, don't tell anyone important because I want to be thought of as a generous person, I guess. All right, let's see. Look at this. I already have a request in from Twister Cat. Please address this tweet in today's KITM, although I think he's talking to Greg because it's Greg's tweet, and I bet that means he will be addressing it. So, okay, I'll skip that one for now. Let's see. Lots of interesting things happening over the weekend. I see that stupid Mississippi governor is in my Twitter stream again at this point, and I'm curious what that's about, but we'll catch up later. This was, of course, Easter Sunday. Happy Easter, and happy Easter Monday to those of you who mark Easter Monday. And I don't know, I saw somebody tweeting about that being on their calendar and not even knowing what it was, and I may not have any idea either, other than the fact that it's the Monday after Easter. Hope you had a pleasant one if you celebrated. Hope you celebrated at home if you celebrated. Unlike people down in, I don't know, I guess the cause celeb was the church in Kentucky that decided to defy stay-home orders, but they did it in a very interesting way. And I don't think they're being given enough credit for their creativity, quite frankly, and I'm not so certain I would have reacted so strongly if they had, I don't know how well they did at communicating what it was they were going to do. But in the end, I thought a rather creative solution, which was that they invited the congregation to join in collective Easter worship by having everybody drive to the parking lot of the church, park, and stay in their cars with their windows rolled up, which presumably would satisfy normally social distancing requirements. The cars put a certain amount of space in between you. Might not be necessarily 6 feet physically between occupants of the cars, but the windows are rolled up. Pardon me. And they were going to broadcast, as I understand it, broadcast the service on a very low power radio station, which you can set up pretty quickly and can be picked up nearby, within a few hundred feet on AM radio. I've seen this done before. It's a fairly simple thing to do. And everyone would just turn on the radios and listen to the service. And I actually thought that was fairly creative and maybe perfectly executed would be something that I wouldn't necessarily oppose people doing. But apparently, of course, in Kentucky, they have a Democratic governor, which you might not have guessed off the bat, except for the fact that they've been pretty aggressive in their stay-home orders, which tips you off because Republican governors simply, in many cases, have dragged their feet or even refused. Anyway, they also had the local authorities telling people, let's please not gather this way in defiance of stay-home orders, even if you're going to be in your cars with the windows rolled up. And I I could see what the argument was for that, I imagined that I could accept one. At first I'd say, this is a pretty clever idea, actually, and it might not even violate the standards we want to impose on people. However, if you ask me, do I really think I'm 100% guaranteed that nobody's going to get out of their car and nobody's going to just say, I just wanted to say hi to so-and-so, haven't seen them in so long, or I want to return this or that to them that I borrowed last year. The riding mower, for instance, I'm going to drive that up and hand that, whatever it is. Or, volunteers directing people in traffic, maybe without masks, maybe with masks, I don't know, and rolling down the window and asking, where should I park if I have XYZ important thing. I could see it being, let's say, less than 100% compliance. And were that the case, it would be cause for concern. So, I think better safe than sorry. They just said, clever as your solution may be, perhaps it wouldn't be the best thing if everybody got together. But this became the cause celeb for conservatives around the country who were sure that this was, the new pinnacle of tyranny, and there were going to be mass arrests, and this was the thing. They spent all weekend saying, I can't believe that they're forbidding people from getting together, and they're going to arrest people just for being Christian, which of course was not why they were arresting anybody. And by the way, Kentucky's full of Christians. They could have arrested them hand over fist if they felt like it, but they didn't. Plus, as it turns out, what happened to you if you drove into this drive-in service? The police said they were going to take your license plate, so people covered their license plates up, at which point the cops, I guess, walked up to your windshield and took your VIN number. But the idea was they were going to say, all right, everybody associated with this vehicle, you're going to be asked to self-quarantine for 14 days out of an abundance of caution. So there was no threat of arrest. there were no arrests affected. There were arrests in other states when people had live services the week before, but nothing of the sort that was threatened by people who didn't actually have anything to do with the situation came to pass. And I don't know, I guess liberty survives for yet another weekend. So, all right, let's catch up on things that might actually affect you or the country by asking Greg Dworkin. Why do I keep doing that to you, Greg? I don't know. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Greg Dworkin here.
That's terrible.
So, the thing about beards and masks is that it's for N95s and fit testing for hospital personnel and healthcare workers. It's not for the regular public. You can wear a cloth mask or even a simple surgical mask with a beard.
Yes.
It's that you can't wear it with an N95. But remember, the purpose of those cloth masks are to prevent you from giving it to somebody else. And so if it's not a completely, totally tight seal, it really doesn't matter. What it's supposed to do is catch the coughing and sneezing and breathing and singing that you do right into the mask, and that's the purpose. And by the way, you got to wear it properly. There's this viral picture. I have it at the top of my Pundit Roundup floating around about people in Philadelphia. There's a non-white guy on a bus not wearing a mask, and the cops are pulling him off.
Yes.
Okay, but if you look at the picture closely, especially the one on the right, one of the transit police has the mask below his nose, covering his mouth with his nose free.
Yeah.
That's not the way to wear a mask.
No. Also not wearing one, but yes.
Not wearing one is also not the way to wear a mask, but they've since changed the policy. Maybe it'd be better if they just handed masks out instead of yelling at people and dragging them off.
Yes, many other transit systems, a lot of them overseas are, but occasionally here, they just bring spare masks and the driver says, put this on.
Exactly.
It's a great way to get a mask.
So there's that. There's a lot of interesting things. What I was struck by over the weekend.
I'm so sorry you were struck.
Is how the media are actually handling, and there was a slew of stories, or as you like to say, a raft of stories, about how Trump really screwed up. For example, the big one from the New York Times, he could have seen what was coming behind Trump's failure on the virus. An examination reveals the president was warned about the potential for a pandemic, but that internal divisions, lack of planning, and his faith in his own instincts led to a halting response. And that was accompanied by a different article which laid out the emails that they got, clearly showing that he had been told, that he didn't listen is another story, but the fact that he had been told is like totally crystal clear. And then the Washington Post has one, as feds play backup, states take unorthodox steps to compete in cutthroat global market for coronavirus supplies, showing that everything they tried to do really didn't work. And the point is, as the White House tries to get you to think they were on top of it from the beginning, the reality is really getting out there, and the public as of now isn't really buying the White House BS because they don't really trust him. The person they trust is Tony Fauci, and we'll get to his non-firing in a minute. Next is there was a Jonathan Lemire story. Behind Trump's botched and delayed coronavirus response, urgent warnings were ignored by a president consumed by his impeachment trial and intent on protecting a robust economy that he viewed as central to his reelection chances. So basically, the White House propaganda machine is going all in on the idea that Trump was on this from the beginning, and it was the Democrats that were interfering with everything, but the media isn't playing along. Yeah,
they have a new ad out that says it outright, and, it's pretty sad, but there you have it.
There's that. And, of course, the next question is, well, how is all of that playing if that's the case? The Surge over at Slate has the 7 swingingest swing states in order of their current swinginess.
Baby. Wow.
Right?
Okay.
They have Arizona, number 1, with Biden +1, Wisconsin, Biden +3, Michigan, Biden +3, North Carolina, Biden +4, Ohio, Biden +4, Texas, Trump +4, and Florida, Biden +6. So overall, those are pretty good numbers for Biden. But the upshot this morning has why Biden's polling lead versus Trump isn't as solid as it looks. And basically what they're trying to say is that Biden leads by 6 nationally, but he only leads by 1 or 2 points or 3 in the important swing states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. So they're making the point that the Electoral College favors Republicans, but even so, while it does that, Biden still retains a lead, even though it's a small one. And it's early, and we're talking about registered voters mostly, not so much likely voters because we don't know who that is, and there's a long way to go. But there's also a long way to go for Trump to fail and to fall. And again, I keep pointing out, it's weird because people are always talking about, well, but this may work and he may still get elected. And there was this dumb piece in the Huffington Post about he's going to pick on China and it just might work. Except he quotes unnamed Democrats like one who says, I'm afraid it will work. And so the headline is Democrats fear that, and it's all BS.
That guy might have been a Democrat.
It might have been. It's all BS. The fact of the matter is that people will talk about the fact, rightly so, that Trump might get reelected, but they never talk about the fact that Trump might crumble and he might get clobbered. Nobody will mention that because in polite company you don't say things like that because I don't know why. They should.
Well, that's
Overton window and otherwise, that's certainly clever. A possibility because he's doing so badly in the pandemic and so many people are going to die and be out of work, they might actually blame him.
That's too straightforward and
we can't say that.
No, I mean that's not clever at all. People will.
Yeah, exactly. It's not counterintuitive. It's not a hot take. It's not woke. How could we say such a thing?
We should. I guess we could do like a double reverse and say somehow. I was going to say this, but
happen. Chet Zarniak, opinion contributor, and I think a former opinion editor at the USA Today has a piece. Trump's coronavirus briefings are too dangerous for the news media to show them live. I changed my mind about showing Trump live after he encouraged Americans to embrace hydroxychloroquine without mentioning any potential downside. And by the way, both the Swedes and the French doing these interventional studies are finding that the side effects are such that some of those studies needed to be halted. It may or may not have good effects. It definitely, in a small percentage, has cardiac side effects and therefore can only be done under the auspices of a physician monitoring for such things and not something for the public to just take it home, even though, for whatever reason, the Trump administration has stockpiled millions of doses of this to the point where actual patients who need it can't get it. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah. It's a weird thing that they did. It's a kind of a weird drug in itself. I did a little bit of reading about anti-malarials. Not really. Don't fool around with that. Don't fool around with anything. Let me
remind you, and I have experience with this the last time we went through this.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 2009, and we have an H1N1 pandemic, and we don't know exactly how bad it's going to be. And a lot of states and the federal government have stockpiled a drug called Tamiflu.
Yes, I remember that.
Because it works reasonably well, sort of, on flu. And when I say reasonably well, what I mean is we think but don't know. It may help to keep the most severe cases out of the hospital. And we think but don't know that it might decrease symptoms by a day.
Yes. I recall
that is not an overwhelming cure, but there's this drug. So you have a pandemic, and the federal government says in its infinite wisdom, why don't we just get a ton of this and then get it to patients?
Yeah. I don't know.
So how? How do you do that? What's the normal way patients get medications?
Internet pop-up ads.
Pharmacies.
Pharmacies, right. Yes.
Right? Your doctor gives you a prescription, you go to the pharmacy, you get your medicine.
Normal. Right. Normal people. Right. I forgot. Yes.
So why don't you do it the same way? Well, you can't. The federal government and the states have already bought this medication. Are they supposed to give it to commercial pharmacies and the pharmacies give it away? And if they don't give it away, what are they supposed to charge? It's already bought. They paid nothing.
Yeah. Give it away, I guess.
Well, we don't know how to do that. We don't give things away.
No.
Pharmacies don't want that. You're asking us to pick up a cost of personnel and rent and lights and all the other stuff small businesses and large businesses and chains do.
True.
And then you want us to give this stuff. We don't do that. We're not doing it. Forget it. You're on your own.
Okay.
So the Fed said, all right,
well,
that's not going to work. How about we just give it to local town and city health departments and they give it away? And the health departments say, we don't want it. We don't have a mechanism for this. What are you, nuts? And so the Fed said, okay, why don't we just give it to hospitals and they'll give it away. And the hospital said, no, we want to keep these people away from the hospital so we can service other things. We're already overflowing. Why are you now asking people to come to the hospital to get this and then get mad at us when we can't do it because we don't have a mechanism to give this away either? And so everybody was mad at the federal government because they hadn't thought through what they are doing. And it didn't work. And there was never a good way to get Tamiflu to the people. And there still isn't because nobody's ever dealt with that. So now they've done the same thing, and they've got this huge stockpile of this drug, which may or may not work. It may not work any better than Tamiflu. Maybe some mild, simple help, but not really what you need when people are dying, like
cure.
Eyes. And now they have it, and they don't know whether it works, and they still have not thought through how they're going to get it to the people. Why? Because in the Trump administration, everything starts the day he's inaugurated, and anything anybody did is wrong, and we have to do it the opposite way, and we're not interested in you guys having done this before, thought it through before, or anything like that. We know better. We're Jared Kushner.
Okay.
All of them. Every single frickin' one of them is Jared Kushner and has a better idea about how to do it because I thought about it while I was at the kitchen table.
Yeah, or they have to listen to him, even if they don't have their own ideas. That was the theme of the weekend.
But it's phenomenal because that's the way the whole thing has worked.
Yeah.
And why it's so frustrating for people who have actually worked on this before.
I can imagine. Tamiflu suggestion. We have a fleet in this country of idled ice cream trucks. How about that? Ride through the neighborhood and the music plays and the bell rings. And if you need Tamiflu or anti-malarial medication, just come out of the house. Wear a mask, but come out of the house.
And congregate.
Line up
in the truck.
Do that, and then infect the ice cream guys.
What do? Do you give it away? Are these men by health workers? I mean,
collect
how do you do
sticks,
it?
and
the whole concept of having a drug that you bought and then having a distribution system that you've never thought of and have to make up on the fly is never going to work.
All right.
Never.
So logistics, once again, proving themselves important. We love process here. And
those bureaucrats, you have to have logistics,
Well, you do.
Through the Army. You can have National Guard do it. That makes way more sense.
Yes, fire it out of rifles and you catch it in
your mouth. Have they done that? No, they have not done
that. Dropping from helicopters?
I don't know. Molly Jong Fast notes that Trump World is really mad about that New York Times article, and they should. Yes. And it's not just national, it's local. There's this piece from the Miami Herald. I have this in the Pundit Roundup. Oh. Julie K. Brown, the great reporter who talked about a lot of the...
that child molesting
Jeffrey whatever his name is, stuff that they broke, Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
Writes, I've never been more proud of the Miami Herald. Fighting Governor Ron DeSantis, whose ignorance has led to countless people getting sick, especially the elderly. The Herald is standing up for those older citizens by suing his ass. Herald drafts a suit seeking ALF records, DeSantis aid. Pressured law firm not to file it. And basically, what they're trying to do is get information, especially in the older community homes, about how many tests they've done and how many deaths there's been. They think Ron DeSantis is hiding that. And that's one of the reasons Florida's numbers are so low.
Oh, well,
and
that
they're
would
not really low, but they're low relative to what everybody said they were going to be when it was going to explode after spring break. So it has in other states.
Suing ALFs.
So how much it has to explode before you've decided it has to explode gets to that Brit Hume tweet that Twistercat was talking about.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. So Buck Sexton says, it takes a special kind of mind to demand unquestioning obedience from everybody because of the data, in square quotes.
Okay.
Then when the data's wrong, come up with a story to pretend it was right. Social distancing did not change the death projection from 100 to 250,000 to 60,000 in 2 weeks. Actually, it did. It's exactly what it did.
What?
So then Brit Hume tweets, the projections and the data were wildly off base, but were the basis for this national lockdown. Remember, when you hear the social distancing and other measures of why the projections are now being revised down, data models assumed full social distancing. No, they didn't. The key data models did not assume full social distancing.
I knew it.
The key data models had a variety of choices as to what might happen, from nothing to partial to a lot. And anybody who looked at the model sees that. So basically what they're making up is this whole concept that, oh, it was going to be fine all along. Nothing happened. Nothing needed to happen. Trump's delay was exactly the right thing, except for the fact that he was pushed too far to shut the economy down. So, of course, we're going to go and gather in 4,000 people groups for Easter Sunday, because why not? These stupid modelists don't know anything about what they're talking about. We're right, they're wrong. I showed you, and that's why we never listen to anybody. And you look at this and say, well, every part of this is completely wrong.
I see.
And you can see the difference between when you social distance early in San Francisco and when you don't, which is New York.
Yes.
Right? St. Patrick's Day parade. Should we have it? Should we not have it? It wasn't decided not to till like 2 days before the parade, even though everybody was screaming at them. Terrible. Whereas back on March 6th, Austin shut down South by Southwest. So people acted early in some cases and didn't act early in others, and you can see the difference in the cities.
Yes.
In fact, there's a lovely historical piece in National Geographic, of all places, about 1918, and the different cities and how they flattened things out and how they didn't flatten things out. And you can pick your city, and of course St. Louis and Philadelphia, the two famous ones. Baltimore didn't. Albany, New York didn't. Denver did. Columbus, Ohio did, and it made a difference.
Oh, okay. There's a real life.
No, they're wrong. And what's that?
I was going to say there's a real time example too. We can talk about it a little bit if you, or I'll share it with you anyway. The Ireland versus the UK, a great side by side A/B comparison in real time of social distancing versus not.
And Boris Johnson.
Yeah, right. Oh, who is also out of the hospital. He and Rand Paul should get together. They should not actually get together, but should talk. We'll be right back.
As long as they're not a third person.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The discussion continues in the background as we were taking our break. I have this information here. I'm going to see if we can track down some some linkable stuff for you to take a look at in the roundup. But Kate Sherrill shared some information with us. The church service that I was talking about down in Kentucky was apparently in Marysville, Kentucky. And she tells me here that, the problem was pretty much as anticipated. They didn't stay in their cars. They all went into the church. People posted pics of themselves hugging and shaking hands. And local law enforcement posted pics of the empty cars. So not at all as portrayed. I mean, I thought it was a clever solution if you stick to it. And that actually brings us back to something Greg was talking about just before the break. That was going to be my next question, except I think you jumped in and answered it, which was great anticipation. But the people like Brit Hume and other naysayers are insisting that, the models are unreliable because look how much they've changed, even though the models, even the revised models, they all assumed social distancing as part of the picture. And I guess my question was, and I would like to talk to an epidemiologist about it really, but I think we get a pretty good answer. As is, the question is, a model that assumes social distancing, does it assume, we said everybody should socially distance and so they will? Or do they assume, there's going to be a certain percentage of people who are going to defy it, who are going to be stupid about it, who aren't going to hear about it, who are going to think they're complying, but they're really not? I would imagine
all
with such
of it,
sophisticated
and that's
models,
why all of the models, pretty much all of them, have three different scenarios.
Okay.
They have the one where people do nothing. They have the one where people stay home and don't leave their house for 9 years, and then they have the one in the middle, which is that this is likely what's going to happen. And the reason they do that is they fully understand that the models are completely dependent not just on the virus, but also on human behavior. And they can't predict human behavior. So they said, well, if people do this, it's 1. And if they do that, it's 2. And then if they do this other thing, it's 3, which is exactly how Tony Fauci has presented all of this, which is why Trump wants him fired.
Well, 3 things is a lot. It's so much more than 1 that is definitely going to happen.
Well,
let's
make a deal. Could do door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. It seems to me that 3 is a reasonable number.
All right. Well, I think it really is. And they showed it on the charts, too. All the curve. Remember, we kept saying flatten the curve. Show me the curve. And if you actually look at the curve, you see that
they're different
shaded.
colors. I'm colorblind.
Yeah.
I can't see, but I could still see there's different shades. There's 3 different shades.
Big, wide swath that's like, well, it's somewhere in here, but the line is in the middle of it. And what's all this gooey, smeared ink stuff? That's the difference between people who listen and people who are numbskulls.
Right. And also, in regard to that church service, I'll go back to what I said about the beards. You can't eliminate risk. That's never the purpose or function of advice. It's to decrease it. That's why the family doctor who said, I sterilize my groceries for 3 days or 5 days or whatever and let the milk spoil before I bring it in the house was like, okay, you don't really have to do that. There's going to be a small, tiny, but not zero risk. If you want zero risk, yeah, you can go do that. But most people, like when they drive, say, I know what the risk is, or at least I think I know what the risk is. I know there's some, so I'll just drive carefully. That's all. I'm not going to not drive because that's a safer way.
True.
It is, really. But, you still have to get from A to B. So, you go ahead and you do it. So what you want to do is decrease risk. It sounds like those folks in the church were trying to decrease risk, and that was fine. The people who got together and said, I ignore all of this, or the pastor in Arkansas who said, my people think this is all a liberal garbage lie, and they'll lick the floors rather than listen to liberals. I mean, they said that, but that was like 3 weeks ago. And every week that goes by with this, it becomes harder and harder to, deny what's going on. And so I'm not so sure that people's reaction a month ago counts in terms of how mad you need to be at them. Yes, if you're leaders, not if you're the public. But having that attitude now, after everything we know, is absurd. And, again, the whole thing of the Brit Hume stuff is completely dishonest. They know what they're doing. They're trying to do propaganda and pretend that Trump has been on it all along and he knows more than the models. That's the purpose of getting it wrong. And it's pretty transparent. And again, the public doesn't buy it. The polls are really clear. Like 85% of the public trusts Fauci, and they don't trust Trump on this. Less than 50% do, even though there's still a underlying, I want to believe the president. We're conditioned to go listen to the president during disasters, but I can't because, we know he's lying.
Yeah,
that's why some Republicans are telling him, don't talk as much. Just get out there and introduce everybody, say your comments, and then leave. That's the better way.
That would be. I'd like to see him adopt that model. I think it's doable, even.
We've been saying that from the beginning. Introduce Fauci and then go.
He was a game show host.
I'm being president. I got calls to make. I got to talk to Putin. I got to talk to MBS. I got to arrange murders. I got to, do things behind. I'm busy. These guys will take care of it.
Yeah. I'd watch out if I was Eugene Scalia. I'm just saying. Guy killed your dad.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Okay. Well, one more mask question. I was wondering about this one. So, okay, now we're getting around to the point where people are saying, well, if you're going to go out in public, we're going to have to get used to wearing masks in public. And so I have, rigged up some masks where we don't have enough. And so when we go to the grocery store, we're doing that. For your, well, let's get out of the house and walk around the block just to get some exercise thing. Is that supposed to be a masked excursion? Is it a masked excursion?
Are you going by yourself? Are you going with somebody? Are you going with household members who you're just going to live with and take the mask off when you get back home? You don't have to wear a mask for that.
Okay.
Here in Newtown, we have plenty of dog walkers.
Yes.
And the streets are relatively quiet compared to what it normally is. Mm-hmm. And there's sort of street etiquette. You see somebody coming across the street and you wave from across the street distance. Every state is giving you some advice about the length of the distance between you and somebody else. In Florida, it's the length of an alligator. In Maine, it's the length of moose antlers.
That does not help.
say a moose away from the next person. You don't have to wear a mask for that.
Okay.
And again, it's 6 feet in less than 15 minutes. So what you're trying to do is decrease the amount of time you spend with somebody, and don't sing to them as they go by.
Right.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I have noticed, we're all masking up for our grocery store runs, but not for...
Because you mask at the grocery store, you're going to be in contact with people, and you're trying to protect the grocery workers.
Yes. I made good sense to me, but then I was wondering, am I under masking or something here? And then I see pictures, of course, now in New York, where it's kind of crowded, and you have a pretty good chance of not being able to keep 6 feet if everybody comes out on a sunny day. Maybe, but all right.
Right, exactly. That's a different story. But also, it's a social message. Remember, a lot of the Asian countries who mask when you're in flu season,
we see that,
are doing it as a social message to everybody else. And so you can wear it for that purpose, but do you have to? No, you don't.
All right. I thought that might be on some people's minds. No one said it, but I felt it.
Should you? Your choice. My mind. You know your own individual area and what's going on here. When I take the dog out for a walk, I don't wear a mask. But you're very cognizant of other people on the street, and it's weird because I saw a group of old ladies, 3 or 4 of them together, walking the dog on the other side of the street, and I said to one of them, we're trying to do this social distancing thing, and they said, yeah, but we're all walking in the same direction, so it's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, no, it's not. You see, because the virus is all going to be spewed in one direction, right? So we're all working. Yeah, people get these strange ideas in their mind about what's okay and what's not okay. But what you're doing is you're lowering the amount of people who are out there who potentially could expose. By staying home, if you do go out, wear a mask. The new data is suggesting, Fauci has suggested 25 to 50, but I see a lot of people using as much as 50% of spread is asymptomatic people, and therefore those are the ones who should be wearing masks. 55% in the most recent poll from ABC of the public are wearing masks in public. That's throughout the country. It's not regional.
All right.
Although I'm sure it's a little bit less in rural areas, and I live in a semi-rural area, but it's a question of how much space you have.
Yeah. All right. I figured it might be the case that, the science that I had in front of me made it sound like it made a certain amount of sense, but I just wanted to check.
Right. I mean, people are using parking lots, but it's every other slot.
Yes. Are they? Are they spacing it out?
Yeah. I mean, they're spacing it out.
Okay. Good job. I haven't noticed. But okay.
I have a picture I'll send you from Newtown, and they actually put cones out so you can see where to park.
Oh, all right. Yeah,
Chris Christie was working the cones, and so he got everybody to be clear about where he's supposed to be. There's lots of different creative ways to do it without going nuts. And again, it's all about lowering risk, not eliminating risk. So don't go nuts about it.
Look at this. George Stephanopoulos has tested positive for coronavirus.
No, he probably interviewed somebody from the Trump administration.
Probably did, and that was unwise. Another sort of breaking news about individual patients. First of the sailors on the USS Teddy Roosevelt has died of his coronavirus infection, unfortunately. And they're up to something like 500 of them now infected because they fired the captain when there was, 12 or whatever. And you know how incompetent he was.
Right. Ricky the Canuckistani has sent us a story about drive-in church Easter services.
Yeah.
From Canada, Nova Scotia Church on Sunday for a drive-in Easter service. So people lined up in their cars then just drove past the church and, did what they did.
Waved? I don't know. Yeah, but I love the idea of using this short-range radio or even just a loudspeaker or something like that. It can be done. You just have to be sure you're going to get compliance. And I guess the problem is down in Kentucky they weren't getting the compliance. But in Nova Scotia, everyone is very polite, and they stayed in their cars.
They were probably a lot more polite about it, too.
Yeah, and they apologized to the cars, too, which was weird.
So what's the deal with Fauci? When Soup Sang writes, Trump remarked that he's made Fauci a star and that barely anybody would have known who the doctor was were it not for the president putting him front and center in the administration's coronavirus response, televised press briefings, and media strategy. Actually, we all kind of knew in Science World who he was.
Yeah, you did.
But, to me, Fauci is like Robert Mueller. You're not going to fire him. You can't afford to fire him, at least not now. You want to fire him later, fine. It won't make any difference. It's already done.
Yeah.
But you can make noise about firing him because your base loves that.
Yes, I think that would be very entertaining for them. He loves retweeting that stuff, but yeah, I think it would be. I mean, he's done crazy
it's
stuff.
Like cutting off money for WHO, which he threatened to do in a press conference, and then in the same press conference said he's only thinking about it. He may not do it. And then the whole point is to get the reporters to run after that shiny object and then say, you have to cover my press conference. See, I make news all the time. You just covered it on your front page.
Yeah. Well.
But you didn't. You didn't really make news. You were just talking to get people to listen to you. And, it doesn't matter, and you're not going to follow through, and it's not really news, at least not if you cover it properly.
Yeah.
So the proper way to cover that is Trump makes wild claims, which he then retracts within the same press conference. And, no, you don't have to cover them live, and that's why that USA Today editorial about not covering them live was right on the money.
Yeah. Well, it's increasingly a shared opinion, and we'll see whether it has any long-term effects. I mean, really, after the coronavirus crisis is over, you also should not be covering his press conferences.
Right. And now here's yet another different New York Times story. 5 takeaways on what Trump knew as the virus spread. An examination by the New York Times reveals there were warnings from the intelligence community, national security aides, and government health officials, even as the president played down the crisis. So that marker is thrown down by the press. You're saying you knew about it. We're saying you did. You're saying you were on top of it. We're saying you ignored everything. You're saying, well, I didn't really know about it because nobody really told me. Like, I didn't really read Peter Navarro's memo. And besides, who listens to Peter Navarro? And we're saying it wasn't just him. It was like 90 other people, and we got the receipts. These are the emails, and you should have known. And so, no, you're not getting away with saying that anybody would have been in this situation, which is your claim. It's not my fault. And besides, it could have happened to anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, that's your claim when you go bankrupt. You know it because you've done it like 80 times. And so you're doing it again now. No, we're not going to hold you to that standard. Sorry. And so really that's the proper way that the press should take this. Of course, Alexander Petri has a very humorous article in the Washington Post entitled, "Can we all agree to just forget this happened? American people, your president has a message. Forget it. Except, of course, for the deaths, which he guesses you may not be able to instantly forget, except for that small detail. It would be much nicer for the country if we could forget any of this happened."
Yes.
Okay? As
quickly.
I've said, after tragedy in this country's past, never remember.
Yeah, I think that's the usual
Never
slogan
remember
for
the
these
Alamo.
things. Yeah, right. Forget 9/11, I believe. People
Right, something
usually
like
said.
that. An interesting thing that came out during all of this is, well, but what about elections? Today's Monday. You know what that means? 5 o'clock tonight or somewhere around there, we might even find out who won that race in Wisconsin for the judgeship.
Oh, is that right? We're still waiting?
Yeah, because we had to wait until the absentee ballots were counted.
Yeah, you told me I had to wait, and then I waited so long I forgot I was waiting.
You still got to wait, but maybe by tomorrow we'll know who won. Maybe.
Okay. Well,
Why was that
If
such a
there's a
fiasco? Because
tomorrow.
Wisconsin forced people to go out and vote. Ron Brownstein has a nice piece here. I have it in the Pundit Roundup.
I will look at
In the states that will likely decide the 2020 presidential election, Donald Trump has already lost his newly declared war against voting by mail.
Good.
Yeah, that is good. Here's that piece.
Yes, right. So he's trying
Battles
to
over the
mail.
details matter, Brownstein says. But the 6 states both sides consider most likely to pick the winner, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, they all allow no excuse absentee voting.
Yes.
That means they're likely to see a vast increase in mail balloting in November, whatever Donald Trump says or does. It's like Trump saying, I'm going to open or shut the economy. It's not up to you. It's up to the governors.
Yeah. Right.
Same thing
Good
with
reminder.
this mail balloting. In those states, the important ones, the ones that are going to decide the election, if you want to ignore national polling and say, well, it's only about the swing states, these are the 6 swing states that matter, and they all are going to allow mail balloting. So what's the point of this whole exercise?
I'm not sure, but it's very exciting. Virginia is the newest. We got rid of our excuse only. I don't know what they used to call it, but now we have no excuse absentee voting as well.
You used to have excuse
Right.
absentee ballot. Now you have no excuse.
Right. Well, excuse me, and now you don't even have to. We
Right.
actually got a raft of another use of the word raft Virginia has a brand new, just signed, just passed raft of voting reform laws, including that, and including repealing our strict photo ID at the polling places, and
right, which at least Virginia, you have assured me, had sent out to people on a regular basis, so it wasn't as much of a problem with getting one.
Well, actually, we used to send those things out, those voter registration cards, and then, the Republicans controlled the legislature, and we passed on top of that, no, now you have to show your photo ID driver's license, despite the fact that we send everybody voter ID cards. Don't use those because they don't have pictures. Use this, which has nothing to do with anything and can prevent black people from voting. Oh, all right. Good idea. But now that's gone.
That's gone. So next is Ohio. This is a reporter, Laura Bischoff, noting that Donald Trump says in a tweet, mail-in ballots substantially increases the risk of crime and voter fraud, and voter fraud is in capital letters.
Yeah.
And, of course, I reinterpreted that. You're very good at interpreting Donald Trump statements. I interpret that as mail-in ballots substantially increases the risk of Republicans losing in capital letters. So Laura Bischoff writes to the Republican Secretary of State in Ohio and says, Ohio is currently conducting mail-in voting. Your ballot must be postmarked by April 27th to be counted. How do you respond to Donald Trump's statement? And the Republican Secretary of State in Ohio says, I have this in the pundit roundup, I can tell you it's not the case in Ohio. As I've said, we're fortunate. We've been doing vote by mail for a long time. Voter fraud, that is, he's referring to. We know how to do it. We know how to get it done securely. Hope we can get back to normal for November, but we'll be ready no matter the situation.
All right.
So Ohio's Republican Secretary of State now publicly pushing back on Trump's frequent and completely baseless claims, Grace Panetta points out, that expanded vote by mail is conducive to voter fraud and apparently crime too. So no. So the states that matter, the swing states, and Ohio isn't that swing state anymore that it used to be, no longer the bellwether. But even Ohio, which leans Republican, it says, no, it's ridiculous. And, of course, we're going to allow our citizens to vote. We're not going to kill them like Wisconsin does.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're playing the long game. If you kill more of your citizens by forcing them out to vote, you're going to lose in the Electoral College and congressional representation in a decade.
Right. So they are playing the long game. So all of that is happening. So don't get too excited about the are we going to be allowed to vote stuff. We're going to be voting by mail. We're going to be voting by mail in the important states that will decide the election, and that'll push all the other states to do it.
Yes.
In other words, if you can't be successful
mail system
at something, then you're not really going to push it that hard.
Yeah. Well, they're working on it now. The new angle, of course, defunding the post office so that we can't vote by mail.
Right, but, that's not going to work either.
Good. I hope not. I understand people are out there buying stamps to try to bolster. I don't know if that's really going to make a budgetary difference, but
somebody who knows more about it than I do should go over this, but a lot of the post office's difficulties have to do with how they fund the pension, and that's based on what Congress tells them to do.
I do keep reading that, and it sounds kind of outrageous, and I understand the explanation, but it's out there, but that's one that's not easy to get on a bumper sticker.
Yep. Well, Trump will kill us in 2020. Or Trump will kill us 2020. That's a pretty good bumper sticker right there.
Yeah, right. It's already done so.
Trump and the Grim Reaper 2020, all of that. And then maybe I'll just finish up the segment today by saying that there was a really, really interesting article in the LA Times about vice presidential candidates.
Okay.
For Biden.
Yeah. It would be more interesting if it was Trump almost, but yeah.
Yeah, less interesting for Trump. But it was written by Christopher Devine and Kyle Kopko. And the reason that's so interesting is that actually, as I'm speaking to you, I'm holding in my hand the book of theirs that just came in the mail called The VP Advantage, How Running Mates Influence Home State Voting in Presidential Election. And I think their next book, which is out in June, is called Does It Really Matter? What difference does it make who you pick for vice president? And they just simply make the point. Biden's choice of running mate matters, but not for the reasons you may think.
Oh, my favorite headline construction. All right, what do I think?
Well, if you thought that you pick this person, you pick Stacey Abrams because she could help win Georgia.
Yes.
Or you pick Kamala Harris because somehow she might help you win California.
Yes.
You're wrong.
Well, you might still win California, though.
either way,
But
and that's why you're wrong.
Oh,
Our research shows running mates matter above all else by shaping how voters view the presidential candidate who selects them. Running mates indirectly influence voter choice by changing perceptions of the presidential candidate, which in turn changes votes. I see an argument going on because you can't stop arguing about 2016. Hillary Clinton picked Tim Kaine. Smart, not smart. Well, she lost, so everything she did was stupid. Whereas Trump wants everything he did was smart.
Yes.
Okay. So did Tim Kaine turn out to be a decent choice because he helped nail Virginia when other blue wall states were lost? Tim Kaine's a decent guy. Yeah. He doesn't excite the base. What does that mean? Is that really something that is going to swing a particular state? Now, the thing about Tim Kaine at that time is it wasn't as horrible as everything seems after you lose the election. But voting or picking somebody like Stacey Abrams isn't because you win Georgia, therefore. That may not be the case. You pick Stacey Abrams or somebody like her or Kamala Harris because you want to show that you're picking a woman that says something about you. In the case of Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams, it would be you're also picking somebody of a minority demographic who happens to be big supporters of the Democratic Party. It's somebody younger than you, so you're thinking about the future.
True.
It's somebody who might be to the left of you so that you can give the party the message that you're trying to be inclusive of everyone.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot more sense, for example, than picking Amy Klobuchar because she'll shore up your position in the Midwest.
Yes. That would make more sense, it seems to me, although that's been the talk.
That's been the talk, and that's why I bring it up. These guys are pretty sharp in terms of analyzing, what helps and what doesn't help. Now, Rachel Bitecofer for a long time has said Stacey Abrams because she excites the base, and you have to get those marginal voters out there. But Harris would be a good second choice. Harris is by far the leading choice. I mean, if you look at the betting markets or the bulk of punditry, it's Biden-Harris.
Yeah, I can imagine that might be.
But there are other choices. There's 10 or 11 other good ones, all of them women. And whether it's a Nevada senator or a New Mexico governor, there's other choices out there. Elizabeth Warren is 70 years old, maybe not the choice.
Yeah.
Biden's already getting up there, and you want somebody who can step in just in case, and especially if you consider Biden to be a bridge and a first one-term president who steps down.
Yeah.
You want somebody younger, but you also want somebody in the middle of a coronavirus debacle, crisis, twin crisis with the economy. You want somebody who can step in and do the job just in case.
Yeah. That would make
in case
sense.
Biden pulls a Boris Johnson or something like that. So, to me, Harris is top of the list over Abrams because Harris has more national, federal experience.
Yeah.
But Abrams is very, very talented, extremely charismatic, and charismatic vice presidents are good. And that does send a message.
Some of them end up running for president later on.
Well, later on, but we're not talking about later on. We're talking about 2020.
Oh, yes, right. Well,
other ridiculous election stuff that people are talking about, I see it, I don't understand it, is Andrew Cuomo should be the president. Biden should step down. Well, why? People hate Cuomo. It's just that he's doing okay now.
15
but
minutes
he didn't do great in the beginning. He was not one of the quicker guys. If you want a hero at state level who performed wonderfully, then look toward San Francisco or the mayor there shut things down right away, or Gavin Newsom, who shut the state down right away. That makes far more sense than an Andrew Cuomo, who, by the way, I still think, as much as I love him being a New Yorker, because I love him arguing with his brother and I love his accent and all the things that I like about him, I think the rest of the country would not like.
Maybe true. But yeah, well, he did have quite the
But it doesn't
TV
matter.
moment
Biden's going to be the nominee, so shut up.
Yeah, that's not likely to change. As between Abrams and Harris, I guess also one of them said, I'd like to be president, and the other one didn't. And so, that to me weighs like, all right, maybe I'll take you then because you were actually interested.
Well, not just interested, but in the process of running for president, I learned a few things, made a few contacts, and this and that and everything else. So, anyway, that's everything. So that's my segment for today. I think we're catching up with the numbers. It's still bad. It's no time to open up. The people who say that we should open up are now trying to make the case that the models have been completely wrong, even though they're right now, and therefore I know more than the models. So go away.
Yeah, I have never really gotten my hands around the idea that, well, this all worked, so we should stop it.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is that it makes Trump look better if you say it that way than say the models were correct in the beginning, and because we ignored Trump and shut everything down, it looks better now, so we better keep doing it and stop listening to the president.
Yeah,
because that worked out better. That they don't want to go there, but that's in fact the reality.
Yeah. Well, maybe he'll get a gut feeling about that soon.
He can't turn the economy on. It's up to the states. He can't decrease social distancing because that's not only up to the states, it's also up to the people. You can open the store. If nobody goes, you lose.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. That's been my take on the whole thing is, okay, he orders it open. F him. He doesn't know anything. Don't go.
Exactly.
Okay, problem solved. That's it. It's up to you, folks. You're empowered. I'm empowered.
You fired Fauci. What are you going to do? Cut his tongue out? He's still going to talk. He's going to all of a sudden stop knowing stuff because you fired him? What are you, stupid?
Yeah, right. Oh,
as we like to say in New York.
Right, that fire him and he's free to say that the president's a moron.
Now tell us what really happened.
Yeah, okay. So, exciting times, but yeah, I think I tend to agree with you that he keeps him around. It's not worth the trouble. If he can ignore everything he says, why bother firing him and drawing that fire? All right, thanks, Greg. We'll check in with you again on Wednesday. Appreciate your coming by, and we'll be back in a minute to talk about it some more. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I've got breaking news. I wish I had one of those little sound effects for breaking news from the other room. It's actually breaking news from CNN, but sent to me from the other room. My wife contributes this interesting piece. Good demographic peek here. Walmart CEO says, and we should always listen to that person. Who is the Walmart CEO? I don't know. We'll find out in a minute. Walmart CEO says we're in the hair color phase of panic buying. I was wondering about that. It's illustrated here with a photo, actually, I think, taken in a Costco, not a Walmart. So that's a good dig against Walmart right there in the layout. But all right, anyway, I guess they wanted to have warehouse style shopping photo to illustrate this thing. Let's see. There are, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 shoppers visible in this picture, which tells you a little something about social distancing. One is wearing a mask, tells you something else about that and why nobody trusts anybody to do the right thing with respect to social distancing. But okay, here's the news. First went the hand sanitizer. We all watched that happen. Then the disinfectants and toilet paper. Now, hair clippers and hair dye are flying off the shelves. In recent weeks, Americans' shopping patterns are serving as a reflection of how the coronavirus pandemic continues to evolve and affect daily lives. You can definitely see that as people have stayed home, their focus shifted. Walmart CEO, here's the answer, Doug McMillon, said on the Today Show on Friday. Was Doug McMillon the guy who showed up at the, was it Friday the 13th press conference that Trump had back then? He had all the CEOs for the first time. I think so. Anyway, here's the story. After stocking up on food and consumable products, shoppers turned to puzzles, games, and other timeless forms of entertainment as well as education, he said. By the way, the unmonitored shopping spree that went largely unremarked upon except on this show, webcams, as people snapped up everything they could in order to be able to be sure that they could participate in Zoom conferences from home, even though most laptops have them built in, for whatever reason. Webcams were gone from the shelves pretty quickly. Anyway, now sales are showing that without the ability to venture to a hair salon, folks are getting shaggy. That's true, and I would venture a guess as to who's buying hair clippers versus who's buying hair color. And this, probably not that much crossover in that, but people are starting to need a haircut. That was true even before we went into hibernation here in this house. You see more beard trimmers, and you really should just shave the whole thing off at this point, and hair color and things like that. It's interesting to watch the dynamic play out, and very interesting if you are also making money hand over fist in watching it play out. But here's a look at how buying patterns have shifted in the last few weeks. Week 1, of course, hand sanitizers, soaps, and disinfectants. Smart buying there, except maybe a little panicky on the hand sanitizer for people, but it was all going to go anyway. The first wave of heightened shopping showed consumers were buying up various means to protect themselves as the virus spread in the United States: masks, cleaning products, and hand sanitizers. During the week ending March 7th, hand sanitizers sales skyrocketed 470% from the year before, according to the Nielsen data. Aerosol disinfectant products shot up 385%. Consumers nationwide were behaving as if they were preparing for a major storm, which was kind of what we were doing at that point. We are working to keep our shelves packed with products similar to when a blizzard is being called for and folks know they might be stuck at home. Andrea Carnes, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Carnes Foods, a family-owned chain of 9 stores in Pennsylvania, told CNN Business in early March. Then, in a buying binge that flummoxed many and served as an inspiration for COVID-19 memes and calculators, shoppers stockpiled toilet paper. Panic buying begat even more panic buying, and the run on bathroom tissue sent ripple effects through the supply chain. I definitely felt some of that myself. We were well stocked on toilet paper before the word came down that we might all be quarantined. And then I heard people were panic buying toilet paper, and I said, well, thankfully I've already got plenty of toilet paper here. And then I thought, well, wow, if there's really none to be had, I suppose if I see some, I should grab some, shouldn't I? And I really didn't have a specific reason in mind. As it turns out, I don't think we knew how long we would be inside at that point. But as it turns out, I think it was the right thing to do to grab a little extra. But I didn't hoard it. I didn't buy gigantic amounts of it, certainly. But I don't know. Definitely seeing it gone triggers something in you. Like, if I know now that I might not be able to get this, then yeah, maybe I do buy some more. And even if you're not buying in panic amounts, you're still contributing to the panic. Oops, sorry about that. Let's see. So what do we got here? We continued on by saying most mills, I guess toilet paper mills, are 24-hour, 7 days a week operations already. And they're running on fixed capacity, which is why I guess we haven't gotten it back yet. This is according to Tom Sellers, CEO of Sellers Absorbent Materials in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I suspect they produce a lot of the brand names that you know better, but fine. Anyway, he told this to CNN Business last month. It's not like there's an idle machine that can be cranked up to increase production. It's full tilt on toilet paper all day, all the time, I guess. Nielsen reported that bath tissue, facial tissue, and paper towel products all saw triple-digit sales increases during the week that ended March 14th. That same week, aerosol disinfectant sales spiked 519%. Weeks 3 and 4 come up next, and here's what people bought then. Spiral hams and baking yeast. I watched that baking yeast go off the shelves, too. As hunkering down at home transitioned to settling in, Americans turned to baking. In the weeks ending March 21st and March 28th, baking yeast sales grew more than any other consumer packaged goods product, up 647% and 457%, doesn't really matter, respectively, over the same weeks in 2019. Spiral hams were also popular, with sales spiking 622% and 413%. What are the two numbers about even? Oh, the 2 weeks, I see. In that same time period, according to Nielsen. I understood the yeast thing pretty quickly. That made sense. And by the way, maybe I can share it with you now. There's a good article out. What if you run into this problem and you don't have any packaged yeast? Well, the answer is good news. There's wild yeast everywhere, and there's some instructions for how to cultivate it. Lots of people are doing it now. Every time you see people talking about sourdough starter, as it turns out, that's a method of cultivating your own yeast as well as actually starting on bread too. So everybody's doing it at home. There are some, I guess, relatively simple instructions. I'll share them with you just in case you're stuck and you need yeast and can't find it. It's a good way. It's a good lesson learned in a number of ways, and it's fun to, go back to basics on these things. So we'll bring that out. Spiral hams. I'm curious about the growth. I mean, that's just a good meat to have in the refrigerator. It stays good for a while. People like it. Maybe they were preparing for Easter, thinking I'm not going to be able to get out and buy this if I want an Easter ham. Whatever. Also, just giant chunks of meat. I think that made sense to everybody. Meat very much on the bubble, too, as it turns out. One of the other random stories out there, I think it was foreseeable, but, qualifies as random short story. Meat packing plants, not really always known as particularly conscious minute to minute on sanitation, let's say, which we're better than we used to be, but it has required a regime of oversight and inspection in order to force it to be the case. Not real good at worker safety in some cases, and just saw a story, and I think I have it in pocket even, from one of the Smithfield ham packaging plants, though not here in Virginia where Smithfield is based, but out in America's heartland. And I think right out in the Dakotas, maybe? I don't know. See if we can find the story. But there it is. Meat plant closes after 293 workers. 293 workers test positive. Nation's meat supply could take a hit. And it was, in fact, datelined Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We'll see if we have some time. We'll jump back into that story. But the headline's all you need there. Let's continue with the trends in shopping here. Flour and yeast makers say there are no supply shortages of their products. Plus, there's never really a shortage of yeast, as they point out. And this links to, I think, I've seen like 5 or 6 stories that all end up linking back to the same tweet thread of how to do your own yeast. So it's been very popular. So it's in this CNN article, even if I forget to give you the yeast thread later on. Anyway, they're just trying to play catch-up, the yeast producers, packagers, not ketchup with a K, but you see what I mean. Much like other manufacturers, I think ketchup is doing fine, whose products are suddenly in demand. It's going to be a minute. It's going to be a minute for the supply chain to react to so much more demand in such short amount of time. Sherry Merrill, procurement manager for Bob's Red Mill, told Quartz. They are really casting a wide net for their quotes, which is really actually, I think I should appreciate that practice more than I do. At first I'm like, well, they couldn't find people with recognizable brand names behind them, but it's good. They should be talking to people all over the country and from suppliers that we maybe who control the supply but who we've never heard of. It's kind of a wise thing. So I think good job here from our reporters at CNN. Who are the reporters, but I haven't credited them. Alicia Wallace. Oh, just one. Alicia Wallace, all by yourself. Fantastic job. I like your methodologies here. All right, back down to week 5 now. Hair clippers and hair dye on the rise. Spiral ham was still king during the week ending April 4th. Easter coming up, so whatever. But Nielsen's data also showed that consumers were starting to gravitate toward other products to maintain their manes. Get it? That's Alicia. You're close to the line on that one. Sales of hair clippers increased 166%, and hair coloring products rose 23% from the same period, same time period a year earlier, according to Nielsen. Americans have become do-it-yourself barbers and stylists, as hair salons across the nation have temporarily shuttered to maintain social distancing measures. Monique Campbell, owner of Endless Extensions in Dallas, we are all over the map on this one, told the Dallas Morning News that closing down is financially stressful, but she understands the situation. It's not news, but what the hell. When was the last time you heard from Monique? right? By asking a stylist to come to you or you going to them, it's still very high risk, she said, according to the report. I don't want to put myself at risk of catching coronavirus just to make sure someone's hair is pretty, even though that's kind of your life. I understand that no one wants to risk that. Okay, I think that's the end of the article there. The real skill, of course, is predicting what comes next. So if anybody's got any guesses, feel free to share them. Maybe you want to throw the KITM hashtag on there, and we'll see if it makes any sense to share everyone's guesses, and then we'll all go out and buy stock, as if we had money just sitting around to do that sort of thing. All right, let's see. Let me catch up on some of the other news from our contributors and listeners out in the audience. Brian Monroe has sent in a note here. Let's see. Lots of video conference calls with shaved-headed colleagues this past couple of weeks. Is that right? People have been bold in doing that. That's yeah. I mean, I guess some people can get away with that. I don't know. For me, I'm worried about it because, I mean, how do I put it? My hair, I think, would look a lot worse if I tried to cut it, or anybody really unskilled tried to cut it. I got some funky, weird cowlick things going on, and it's a complicated mess. And if you don't do a good job on it, it really looks horrible right away. It's like you can't even just shape it to look good that day, and then it falls apart afterwards. It's a real mess right away. On the other hand, not cutting it is no bargain either. So I'm just not turning on the cameras at this point. But, yeah, I don't know. We'll see how long we can avoid that. Let's see. Here's another comment, different subject. Karen chimes in with this one. Are the Bidens getting Secret Service protection on par with what a presidential candidate gets, as opposed to whatever a former vice president gets, if anything? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, the rules ordinarily are when the nomination is made and accepted, that's when the protection kicks in. And he is, I assume, has got some ongoing protection, although vice presidents don't get a whole lot. Something tells me that maybe like the most, the immediate past vice president might get a small detail, but that at some point I think they may phase it out for vice presidents, but I'm not certain that is the case. But I think he's still under some protection. But yeah, the big time protection comes when the nomination is made, even when the nomination is assured but hasn't been, formally offered yet and accepted. I don't think the Secret Service counts it, and there's very little chance that Trump would extend that to Biden or anybody else if he didn't have to. So I doubt that the increased protection is there. On the other hand, nobody's going outside. So maybe there's that. That may play into things. All right. Let's see. Okay. We will. We got a link of sorts. Kate is. Well, do I have to tell everybody you're in a meeting, Kate? I don't think I'm disclosing anything confidential here, but that's a good reason. I'm in a meeting now, but here's a link to a pic where the law enforcement officers tagged empty cars at Marysville Baptist Church. So we can take a look at that. The Courier Journal down there in Kentucky. Coronavirus Roundup. It's church versus state in an Easter Sunday showdown. Vroom. Sounds like one of those monster truck rallies. As deaths rise, which is a serious thing, and you can't be making car noises at it. Kentucky on Sunday marked an Easter like few before it, one defined by both stay-at-home worship and high-profile defiance of authorities' attempts to limit mass gatherings on Christianity's most holy day. It all came as the toll from the coronavirus pandemic continued to climb, with 3 more victims, bringing Kentucky's death toll to 97, including more in long-term care facilities. The Commonwealth added another 134 confirmed cases, raising that total to 1,963. Indiana, meanwhile, reported more than 500 new cases and 13 new deaths on Easter Sunday. So important background in all this. I don't know if I can see if I see any pictures of people out of the cars there, although there is a photo of the pastor who's not in a car but outside and on a stage doing his broadcast, which I guess I anticipated would be the case and would still be okay as long as there's nobody out there with him. But I guess they just couldn't control themselves. And word is that they weren't good to their word in terms of maintaining social distancing. Not a surprise, probably anticipated, and that's why the local authorities said no. But people went and did it anyway, and yet no mass arrests, no re-education camps, no nothing. So just wondering when that was going to start happening. Okay, let's see. Other stories to add to the pile of those rounded up by Greg. Still more reporting on how many signs, signals, warnings, heads of hair set on fire, etc. the Trump administration ignored or failed to understand or what have you. Politico adding one more to that pile with a trending piece in Pocket under the headline of Inside America's 2-Decade Failure to Prepare for Coronavirus. Dan Diamond wrote this piece. I'm sure a lot of us saw the headline and initially thought, are they trying to both sides this thing? And, that's the usual instinct, of course. But it's not a clear, overt, both sidesing in the body of the piece. And that's right up on the edge there with the headline, 2-Decade Failure. And they do note some failures even during the Obama administration, some situations in which people looking back on it say, I wish we had been better prepared for this or that. But it doesn't really feel to me like even the body of the article tries to hang very much on Democratic administrations in all this. And maybe it's just difficult to do, given that the Obama administration, one, responded fairly well to potential pandemic situations, and two, it was bookended by Republican administrations that, rather famously were reckless in their cuts for long-term preparedness for almost everything. So it was very interesting. It also reminded me, of course, that there are receipts out there on Donald Trump. Trump, we remember, was just becoming more of a public political figure thanks to Twitter during the late Obama administration. And he was a great critic of the Obama administration, of course. And, there are any number of tweets that he ended up making criticizing the response to the Ebola outbreak, criticizing response to the H1N1 bird flu outbreak, all of which were, have since been mooted by his failures on coronavirus, times 100. It's really rather ridiculous, including one tweet that this story brought up that I went back and looked for, and I did successfully find earlier this morning. There was, when was it? Here we are, the August 1st, 2014 tweet in which he says, the U.S. cannot allow Ebola, all in caps, Ebola-infected people back. And this was the more astonishing part of this. People that go to faraway places to help out are great. Doctors, nurses, etc., who went overseas to help with Ebola. They're all great, but must suffer the consequences! ! Which is sort of an interesting statement all by itself. You must suffer consequences for being a great person and volunteering to go overseas to help stop the spread of a deadly pandemic, not only in Africa, but before it reaches the United States. Now, the consequences at the time, you may recall, speaking as we were earlier of Chris Christie, in some cases meant spending your isolation in a tent in a parking lot at the airport or wherever the hell it was. Was it outside of the hospital that they put that woman, the nurse, in a tent and forced her to stay in there? And I'm sure that probably was in the back of people's minds when we started to hear about quarantining for coronavirus. But as it turns out, the condition's much better we don't have that many tents, so we just told people to stay at home instead, even though they were relatively untrustworthy beings. But that was revealing all by itself that people that go to faraway places to help are great, but must suffer the consequences. And I wondered, actually, in the context of the Kentucky church thing, where people, once you got past, if you could, help people get past the stupid idea that they were being arrested because they were Christian, and instead focus on the fact that, one, they weren't arrested, and two, it wasn't because they were Christian, it was rather because they were violating the stay-at-home orders, and after all, they were only being asked to do what? Suffer the consequences. Even though you're great for going to Easter services, which you're really not, but let's say, you're one of those people who think that you are, well then, it's a trade-off. You want to go to services that bad? Well, there are consequences, and Donald Trump has told us how he feels about consequences in the middle of a viral outbreak before, unless, of course, he's just a total gimmitarian and whatever he says in the moment he means, but only for that moment, and the next moment can bring the exact opposite. I suppose that could happen. Gee whiz, I hope not. Anyway, so suffer the consequences. And by the way, what are the consequences? The consequences in this case, you don't have to live in a tent, nothing like that. Just stay home for 2 weeks, like you were supposed to do and likely you are going to do anyway, except for those of you who are defying orders all the time. But, and share that fate with the rest of the country who is also going to be home for 2 weeks, so what's the big deal? But they love hyperbole, they love being victims, they love their victimhood among the Twitter crowd who think everything is happening because people are Christian. All right. Just want to throw that one out there. Also, I guess we were reminded of Trump's criticism of the Obama administration's response to the H1N1 flu. I can't believe they made this mistake, but early in the coronavirus outbreak, and I guess this either tells you just how dumb they are or maybe also tells you how strongly they really believed this whole thing was a hoax and would go away with warm weather or whatever. And they were tweeting about how the Obama administration, you want to talk about a disaster. We've done nothing wrong with this coronavirus thing. What about the Obama administration's response to H1N1 bird flu? 12,000 people died in that, and you don't see people talking about that. Nobody shut down the economy for that. Nobody blamed Obama for that, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, it wasn't even a week until we too had seen 12,000 people die of coronavirus since they said that. And now, today, we look to be poised to just about, if not actually past and just about approach, double that number. 24,000 or so dead from coronavirus today, possibly tomorrow. And by the way, the 12,000 people who died, we just have to stress this again, 12,000 people who died from H1N1 flu died over the course of a year's worth of that pandemic. I think I looked up the timeline this morning, and it was something in the neighborhood of like April 2009 was the first infections detected in the United States, and it wasn't until August of 2010 that the World Health Organization declared that pandemic over, though I'm sure the danger was long past, perhaps in the bulk of the United States even earlier. So if you pare it down to a year or so, 12,000 people died over the course of a year in the United States from H1N1. 24,000 have already died in the course of a month from coronavirus. I really honestly, except for how stupid and reckless they are, just can't believe that Trump and Trump's supporters brought that up. I can't believe they didn't see that they were walking into a trap. But that's just the kind of people they are. If they could see when they were walking into traps, we would have been able perhaps to do a lot better, let's say, in mitigating the coronavirus outbreak, and you wouldn't have had, well, for instance, Kellyanne Conway. This is, I think, is going to live on in infamy. Maybe the worst statement caught on video from somebody in the administration who wasn't Donald Trump. But you remember when she was like angrily, snarkily sniping back at a reporter who said, they were having, what about trying to contain this? And she said, do you not think it's being contained? Like, no sane person could possibly think that. Hold that one up against finding out that twice the number of people that were killed by H1N1 are already dead from coronavirus in 1/10 the time. Do I not think it's contained? Nah, I think it's not. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, where to go next? Who knows? I mean, I don't know whether it's better to read some of these articles or I could run around reading you headlines, but I imagine you were running around reading headlines most of the morning anyway. I don't know how much of a service that is to anybody, but sometimes I feel like we want to cram in so many stories just to recommend that you have something to read during the day and catch up on them on your own. Why? I doubt anyone's asking the question, but just in case anybody's asking the question, well, why would anybody be so concerned about a church in Kentucky getting together and having an Easter Sunday service? Obviously, spread of the coronavirus, but sure, what do you have by way of actual facts where this sort of thing has actually happened versus something that we're afraid of? So I'll grab this one here. I guess right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. The Christian Post, which I didn't even know was a post, but I guess there is one. The Christian Post reports on back on Friday, March 27th, just in case you needed, proof. The headline, 43 people fall ill at Pentecostal church after revival. 10 test positive for coronavirus. Of course, we're talking about a revival meeting here, not revival from a state of death or near death by medical personnel once you fall ill with coronavirus or anything else. But you get the idea. Leonardo Blair will credit you in your work for the Christian Post here. But this was early on. I mean, early days in terms of our lockdown, I guess. March 27th. Seems like a million years ago. Last month. Several members of an Illinois Pentecostal church, and it doesn't matter that it's Pentecostal, could have happened to anybody, are either at the hospital or in home quarantine after at least 43 congregants fell ill during a revival service 2 Sundays ago. And now they need service from medical personnel and probably revival as well in some cases. And at least 10 of them have tested positive for the new coronavirus. This was 2 Sundays ago, back on the 27th. So mid-March, I guess people still hadn't absorbed it. There were certainly places in the country where the prevailing sentiment was still, this isn't going to be so bad. It's just like the flu. One of those places was the White House, of course. And I guess the other was here in Illinois. In a Facebook post Wednesday night, and it's way back, remember this is a March 27th article, Lena Locascio, I'm guessing, L-O, and then capital C-A-S-C-I-O, wife of Pastor Anthony Locascio, who leads the Life Church of Glenview. Hopefully it won't lead to anybody's death, but the Life Church of Glenview said at least 43 of the approximately 80 people. And that's not a big crowd, quite honestly. I mean, certainly back in those days, on March 15th or so, most people had been warned not to gather in groups of more than 25 probably, and they kept, revising it down. But okay, 80 people. As revival meetings go, not very big, right? And I'm sure they thought they could get away with it. But then more to the point here is 43 out of 80. The majority of the people who went to this thing were by March 27th infected with coronavirus. Who knows where they are now? Maybe it's up to 100%. I have no idea. I'd like to follow back up on that one. I wonder if there's any news articles out there about that. I'll put my interns on searching it out. My vast staff. Right. Anyway, 43 of the approximately 80 people who attended, maybe there were 87 of them. You don't know. And it's not a majority. Anyway, this was, again, a March 15th service. They've fallen ill. And everyone who has been tested for the new coronavirus has come back positive. Everyone. For the virus, which has already killed more than 1,470. Amazing, because that was 22,000 deaths ago. And infected more than 97,000 people nationwide. And, of course, we're bumping up against 600,000 these days. We have 43 infected at minimum from our church or connected to our church from our last service on March 15th. They all haven't tested. There we are. But whoever gets a test done ends up being positive, and we all have the same symptoms. It's just not easy. It's especially not easy when you're a leader and a pastor of a precious church and we all got infected together, she wrote. So I think there's some remorse here. Church leaders said the meeting was held days before, key point, the governor's stay-at-home order. However, it was after officials called for large public events to be scaled down to 1,000 people. 80 is less than 1,000. And for private ones to have a maximum of 250 in attendance, the Chicago Tribune reported. I can't fault them quite the same way. But the point is not so much, well, break the law and see what happens, or defy orders and see what happens, but rather have a gathering and see what happens, whether you're defying orders or not, whether you're in compliance or not. Gatherings are dangerous. So we have that. I don't know who needed to hear. I don't know who needs to hear this. It's like the most popular line on Twitter. I don't know who needs to hear this, but I know who did. You. Sorry. Anyway, just wanted to, throw out the fact that this has actually happened. And yeah, if you are, if you are such a person, or you know such a person who's thinking about having such a gathering at a church, and it's going to work out if we're all in the cars. Now we have a story about people get out of their cars. If you still think, well, even if it's just our little church, yeah, you can infect half the church and maybe more pretty quickly. So, think twice, even if not about yourself, then about everyone else in the world. That would be nice if you would pay attention to that. Jumping back quickly to the story about Virginia's changes in voting access laws, just to give full credit for everything that the newly elected Democratic majority in the legislature plus Democratic governor have been able to get done very quickly. Here you go. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam announced Sunday that he signed new legislation that expands access to voting in the Commonwealth, another Commonwealth, us in Kentucky. The new bill repeals Virginia's voter identification law, makes Election Day a state holiday, you like that? And expands access to early voting, according to a release from the office of Governor Northam. And of course, that's what it says in the release, because that's really what the law says, as opposed to what happens in the Trump administration. Early voting will be allowed 45 days before an election. That's a lot. Without a stated excuse. We used to have to state an excuse here. The Commonwealth currently requires voters who want to vote absentee to provide the state with a reason from an approved list why they are unable to vote on Election Day. Voters will no longer be required to show a photo ID before they vote. Election Day will now be a state holiday and will guarantee each individual has the opportunity and time to vote. I'm not certain how that's guaranteed, but here's some of the changes they've made. The new legislation repeals the current Lee Jackson holiday. It's about time, right? That's, Robert E. Lee, in case you were wondering, and the Jackson in question, Stonewall Jackson. And you know which side they fought for. In Virginia, they used to say, well, our side. But now all of us Northerners have moved down and taken over Northern Virginia where the bulk of the population is, and we say, no, the other side. And it's true. And even if it was our side was wrong and lost. And it's about time to get rid of it. Anyway, this was a holiday apparently established over 100 years ago to honor Confederate Generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson, by the way, killed in a tragic gun fail accident. Not that tragic. 1, it was war. 2, he was fighting for the other side. And whatever. I'm sure his family didn't like it very much, though. The bill also implements automatic voter registration. Automatic. For people accessing service at a Department of Motor Vehicles office or the DMV website. That's good news. I don't see why they don't just enroll you when you turn 18 and the state is aware of your date of birth somehow, but maybe that's too much trouble. Moreover, the legislation expands absentee voting timelines to ensure access to the polls, and it extends in-person polling hours from 7 p.m., which was always too early, I thought, for our polls to close, to 8 p.m. 7 p.m., people who, work reasonable hours plus have a commute have difficulty getting there and getting online. So that's the basics of it. That's all pretty good. The state holiday thing is neat. I don't know how many businesses will close for state holidays versus federal holidays, but it won't make for that much of an impact for us around here. I don't know what it's like in other counties, but our schools are typically closed on Election Day already, although I was under the impression that was because we use the schools as polling places around here, and the schools were uncomfortable, and I think rightly so, having random adults have access to the premises while the kids are there. And even though most people will obviously go about their business voting and not bothering anybody, they don't like to have unmonitored adults roaming the halls in a situation where it's weird or impolite to ask them, what the hell are you doing here? So our schools have been closed, so might as well go ahead and make it a state holiday. Terrific. Very progressive, and I'm glad we got it done. I hinted earlier in the show about a tweet thread that I mentioned that was comparing the UK's outcomes in this coronavirus pandemic to Ireland's. And I want to run through it. It's rather lengthy, but I thought it was very valuable and might help you out and help you pose questions to those people if you decide to waste your time with them on Twitter or in real life or wherever else, who bring up stupid comparisons or make stupid points like Brit Hume was making. The kind of person that says, either we can reopen the economy now because we've had some limited success with distancing, or the models are stupid and so therefore we shouldn't listen to doctors, or whatever. This was offered up, and I wish I had saved the tweet that actually brought this thread to my attention by injecting it into my tweet stream, because they made a nice comment about here, this being a fantastic example of A/B testing, like they do with direct mail and polling and things like that, where they say, well, if one choice can lead to two possibly distinctly different outcomes, let's test them side by side. A/B testing. One group does A, one group does B. We see who does better. But this tweet thread comes from Elaine Doyle, who tweets under the handle of Lainey Doyle, Lainey, and then Doyle, Doyle, no spaces, no underscores. You want to look for Lainey Doyle. And I guess she's Irish, because whatever. That's the way it sounds in this thing. What do we see here? Writer and researcher, special interest in the history of medicine, so that's going to pique her interest, surely. Formerly a historian, a PhD, and a master's in philosophy from the University of Cambridge. So, some nice academic credentials to throw in there. She begins this way. I don't understand the British media. Me neither. I really, really don't. But she went to Cambridge, so she should, and I have an excuse. I think it's because they spell things wrong. Basic things. Ireland and the UK started this pandemic with roughly the same number of ICU beds, that is 6.5 ICU beds per 100,000 people for Ireland, not sheep or anything like that, although you could certainly count things that way. But this is what makes the AB comparison so great. They're very similar countries. Plus, of course, you can correct for differences in the size of the population by using these rates. XYZ per 100,000. So, ICU beds, 6.5 per 100,000 in Ireland, 6.6 per 100,000 in the UK. If anything, the UK was slightly better off. Slightly. And there's a chart, and it shows it. But the numbers tell the same story. As of today, which for purposes of this tweet was Saturday, April 11th, Laney continues, as of today, there have been 320 deaths from coronavirus in Ireland and 9,875 deaths in the UK. Those numbers have no doubt changed since then, but we'll continue with this thread before looking them up. Okay. But the UK has a ginormous population, right? Especially compared to Ireland. So we adjust per capita. How many deaths per 100,000 people? As of Saturday, the 11th of April, there have been 6.5 deaths per 100,000 people in Ireland, which is also their ICU bed rate, by the way. But okay, 6.5 deaths per 100,000 people in Ireland. There have been 14.81 deaths per 100,000 people in the UK. Guys, people have been dying at more than twice the rate in the UK. Emoji. Something is happening here, right? I would add to that. She didn't put the emoji in there. You'd think, given the long and then one of those gestures / emotions enclosed in asterisks, right? During this, you'd think, given the long hand waves toward a complicated mess, let's say long shared history between the two regions, it's one region, but two countries, that this would be a massive news story, right? And that was interesting that it wasn't. I mean, it'd be a huge angle for the UK media, surely, right? But no, it's crickets. That the UK's closest neighbor, with almost the exact same starting time, or rather starting line in terms of its health system and time in terms of when the virus got there, but with almost the exact same starting line in terms of its health system, nationalized healthcare, is having a wildly different outcome. Not saying Ireland's a paragon of virtue, loads to discuss and critique and make better, but still nothing, at least not much that I can see in terms of media interest in this story, Laney says. But wait, it gets worse, because if you compare the per capita death rate between Ireland and England, rather than the UK as a whole, not including necessarily Wales and Scotland, and I don't know how much else they would pair out of that. It depends who you're talking to, but if you're talking about England only, England has almost 2.5 times the number of deaths as Ireland per 100,000, right? That's pretty crazy. Although, again, the 14.81 is put out there, and I don't know whether that was a typo or what. But okay, well, basically, no matter how you slice it, UK doing considerably worse than Ireland. 2 to 2.5 times worse, as a matter of fact. So, you have two English-speaking countries with close cultural and historical associations, both with underfunded health systems, but national ones, and comparable levels of ICU beds, almost half the EU average, by the way, as it pointed out here, going into the pandemic. But England has more than 2.5 times the deaths. Why? If you're arguing over whether Boris and company's herd immunity policy and the resulting delay in lockdown had any effect on death rates, here's your angle, lads. Right? And do you think any British newspapers would be curious about whether or not their initial dalliance with the herd immunity, let's just, as we said it here, as Trump said it reportedly, let's just let it wash over the country and get everybody immune that way? Well, here you've got real-time A/B test happening right in front of you. The person who originally sent this around to me also made mention of the A/B, but I'm glad Laney gets credit for it here. You have A/B test time happening right in front of you because Ireland closed down earlier, much earlier. While Boris was telling the British people to wash their hands, our Prime Minister, and we learned how to pronounce this word, but have forgotten since. Was it Taisich or something like that? Love the Gaelic spelling for their word for Prime Minister. Taoiseach. I found a pronunciation for it once, the last time he was in the news when Trump and or Pence was going to Ireland, but damn, I haven't remembered. Well, now, back to the tweet thread here. So while Boris was telling the British people to wash their hands, their prime minister was closing the schools. While Cheltenham was, I'm sure Cheltenham is how we would read it, but I'm sure, what is it, Cheltenham, I guess, was going ahead, and over 250,000 people were gathering in what would have been a massive super spreader event. Ireland had canceled St. Patrick's Day, and you got to imagine that's fairly serious for them. In Ireland, we watch a lot of British media and news, and let me tell you, it was like living in bizarro world. This is the part I mentioned before. Because our Irish TV news was filled with very direct, serious pronouncements about what was coming. When we switched, though, to British TV channels, crickets. Particularly vivid for the weekend before Paddy's Day, rolling restrictions in Ireland, so no groups of greater than 100, but the pubs weren't yet closed. That was a mistake. Video emerged of people singing in a pub in Temple Bar, so there was then a public outcry, led to public outcry, a shut the pubs hashtag trended. The health minister comments, voluntary closure ensued. Again, take a beat. There was a public outcry to close the pubs the weekend before St. Patrick's Day. The seriousness of the situation was very, very clear in Ireland, and there was massive public buy-in. That same weekend, this was happening in Cardiff, which is, of course, Wales, and therefore not England, but yes, UK. And she embeds the tweet of some other random person, essentially. I don't know. But anyway, this person tweets, I guess in response to the rush in both the United States and I guess even in the UK, where Boris Johnson was in control, the rush to blame China for the whole thing. He says, let's blame China, UK version. Here is video from March the 16th. Confirmed case 1372, UK Cardiff, Motor Point Arena, Stereophonics concert. A video of a packed, major arena rock concert. And it's jammed and everybody's in there singing along on March 16th. That could be, a big part of the fact that they are having 2.5 times the deaths. So while Ireland's closed, they're seeing videos of arena concerts still going on in the UK. Elaine continues, I remember watching that video being posted on Twitter that Saturday night and feeling sick to my stomach. How many people were being infected at that very moment, singing along to the Stereophonics? It was such a huge crowd. You'll see when you take a look at it yourself. I assume there were people in Cardiff who felt the same way I did, but the difference was I was supported by my government. You weren't. And that cost lives. And I wish I hadn't flubbed that line because it's super important. You may have felt the same way I did, but the difference was I was supported by my government. They had my back. You weren't. And now you're dying. The Stereophonics gig was on March 14th. Median 5 to 7 days to get sick. Let's allow another 14 days to get seriously ill. The people infected at the Stereophonics gig were in the hospital, or as they say, in hospital, last week. The people they infected will start dying next week. That's this week. Pandemics roll along exponential curves. The New York Times, using Britta Jewell's calculations and credit given, along with a link to the Twitter account of Britta Jewell here, using Britta Jewell's calculations, showed it beautifully here, and there's a nice chart here illustrating, everything we know about the dangers and spread and exponential growth you don't really need that explained to you. But showing the explosion of the stuff. And in the headline of that piece that she's linked to, the exponential power of now. It's a nice play on fierce urgency, right? Anyway, she continues on, Elaine does, that saying that Britta Jewell used U.S. figures and showed that if you started to stay home this week, March 13th, the time of publication of Britta Jewell's piece, you could prevent 2,400 infections. But if you started to stay home next week instead, you prevented 600 infections. That's an interesting way of putting it. How many people don't get infected based on your staying home? Stay home 1 week earlier, 2,400 less infections out there. Flatten that curve. But wait until next week, 600 infections. It still helps, but it helps a lot less. 4 times less in 1 week. It's weird, right? Exponential curves, she says, are really counterintuitive. When they go up fast. Timing matters a lot. By staying home this week rather than next week, one person could prevent an extra 1,800 infections. One person. And as who's this person? Jason Kotke pointed out, and it's credited and linked here, assuming a 1% death rate, 1%, and we're way over that, 1%, that's 18 lives saved. 18 lives saved by the choices of one person to stay home for the week starting March 13th rather than the following week. And that's a 1% death rate. Now, I guess we won't even give time over to it except to mention it, but UK is running a 12% death rate. One choice, one person staying home 1 week earlier instead of 18. I don't even know what that is. Offhand, I should remember when they tried to teach everybody their times tables up through 12. That would have been a handy thing to pay serious attention to. I didn't do it. 12 times 18, that doesn't go up that high, the times tables, but 216 lives saved under the conditions actually occurring in the UK. Now here in the United States, it's 3.5%, 3.8% and rising our morbidity, and we can get to that if we didn't. I don't know if I mentioned it on Friday, but let me get through this thread instead. 18 lives saved, though, by the choice of one person to stay home for the week starting March 13th rather than the following week. That Stereophonics gigs was on the 14th of March. And of course, right, if 18 lives are saved by staying home, whereas if you don't stay home, they're lost, 18 lives times how many thousands of people who are at this thing. Not everybody's going to spread it that far, but I don't know. It's getting kind of crazy. I'm not singling them out, honestly. I'm not. They're a great band. She's not blaming the Stereophonics. I really like them. I'm not tagging them because what would that do? And I'll say again, those figures were based on U.S. infection numbers at that point, with 30% growth rate per day. It's not the UK. And in a pandemic, every day counts. Every hour counts. That's the real point of this thing. And the UK government wasted 2 whole weeks. Which weeks did they waste? Ireland canceled Paddy's Day on March 9th, initiating a series of rolling controlled restrictions from school closures and large group bans starting on the 12th, to closure of non-essential businesses and social distancing to full lockdown. It was precise, clearly communicated, controlled. The UK closed their schools on March 20th, a full week after we closed ours. Perfect for A/B testing, certainly. Full lockdown came to the UK on March 23rd, and while there was some muddied, confused advice in the UK between times, avoid non-essential travel from about March 16th. Don't go to the pub, but then again, they're still open, so maybe do. There was an abrupt about turn after the Imperial College report came out. We all remember that. The comparisons aren't neat between the two countries because the processes and nomenclature are different. Technically, the UK went into lockdown before Ireland, but that's not a fair comparison as we were already operating our delay phase from 12th to the 27th of March. But I would argue the crucial difference lies in that 2-week period, from March 9th, when we canceled Paddy's Day, to March 23rd, when the UK government finally and abruptly wheeled about and went into lockdown. 2 weeks. And because the UK government delayed, distorted, and distracted for those 2 weeks, the UK people ended up on the wrong part of an exponential curve when lockdown started. And now, the UK has over twice the number of deaths per capita than in Ireland. But wait, it's worse. How could it be worse? Testing. And, well, we're not even going to be able to make it through the testing part of this, but there you have it. That gives me a chance to say the thing about testing that I wanted to say about the U.S., by the way. Ironically, Trump against widespread testing because he wants to keep the numbers down for political purposes. But as I've been observing this, because we don't test enough people and we don't know how many people have really had coronavirus and not died, our morbidity rate looks to be topping 4% at this point. This after Trump was very public in predicting a fraction of 1%.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So that's some prediction. A fraction of 1%, I'd say, but instead something like 4%. Rather large factor to be wrong by. This and many other esoteric topics, probably all related, though, to the coronavirus, coming up next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Do stay tuned for his take on everything happening around the world and at home.